Today on Steelers Talk, I'm going to tell you the only way I can see the San Francisco 49ers trading a wide receiver to the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason. It's pretty interesting here. I have one key that I think is really the key to a potential trade with the Niners. I'll share that here in just a second. Then we'll go into two new Steelers wide receiver targets that have been revealed and linked to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'll share my thoughts on those two pass catchers later in today's show, so make sure you guys stick around. But before we get into our top story here, let's break down what Ray Fittipaldo had to say from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on what the Steelers are planning to do at the wide receiver 2 position for the rest of this offseason. He says the Steelers will have a number 2 receiver on their roster in September who is not currently on the roster right now. So listen, guys, when a move happens, when Omar Khan pulls that trigger and brings in a veteran wide receiver, we're going to have you guys covered either live or with just a regular video here on YouTube, breaking down that wide receiver, who they are, what their history is, how they're going to fit into Arthur Smith's system. It really does feel like the Steelers are going to be adding to this wide receiver room relatively quickly now that it's post-June 1st. So make sure you click that subscribe button right now for free breaking news coverage on the Steelers right here on YouTube. All right, so now let's talk about the San Francisco 49er situation right now, guys. And I'm sorry to report that there just isn't a whole lot of incentive right now for the San Francisco 49ers to trade either Brandon Aiyuk or Deebo Samuel to the Steelers if the compensation is only going to be draft picks, okay? And the reason why some people think a trade is coming in the near future here, specifically with the Niners, is because they did draft Ricky Pearsall in the first round this year out of Florida. They just signed Juwan Jennings to an extension here that's going to keep him in town for a couple more years. And, of course, they drafted Jacob Cowing as well out of Arizona in the middle round. So it seems like they can afford to unload one of these wide receivers, and there's been a debate as to which one the 49ers would unload, whether that be Brandon Aiyuk or Deebo Samuel. But honestly, guys, I don't think San Francisco is incentivized to make a deal if the Steelers are only going to offer them draft picks. And just think of it this way, guys. I mean, the 49ers can afford to pay Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel this year because you can give Aiyuk that massive contract extension and just offload the money into future years. And then, at the end of the day, you can just trade Deebo Samuel next offseason and you get to keep him in your wide receiver room for this year and kind of keep all of the main pieces to that wide receiver room in place for yet another Super Bowl run here in 2024. And the reason why this benefits and this strategy benefits San Francisco, of course, is that it maintains talent and depth at the wide receiver position, okay? Like you have Ricky Pearsall and you take the pressure off of him as well, which is another big positive there. So you would have Brandon Aiyuk, you would have Deebo Samuel, you would have Ricky Pearsall, you would have Jacob Cowing, you would have Juwan Jennings. So that wide receiver room there in San Francisco is going to be pretty injury-proof throughout the 2024 season if they don't make a move. And the big way to think of this, guys, and the reason kind of the way San Francisco is kind of thinking about this situation right now is why would they trade, say, Deebo Samuel to the Steelers for like a second or a third round draft pick if they can just trade him to the Steelers next offseason for a second or third round draft pick in that same draft? Why wouldn't you just keep Deebo for another year and still get the same value for him? That's why trading draft picks this late and doing it after the draft in this offseason just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for San Francisco to come to the table. However, there is one way to potentially get San Francisco to come back to the negotiating table, and that's to give them a current player on the Steelers roster that would be of value to the San Francisco 49ers and their pursuit of another Super Bowl championship there in the Bay. Now, the big question then becomes, what exactly does San Francisco need on their roster? What does the Steelers have that could be of value to the 49ers in 2024? And the answer to that question is offensive line help. Okay, you remember back to that Super Bowl against the Chiefs last year. What was the big thing that really crumbled that San Francisco 49er offense in that game? It was the pass rush. It was the ability to get to Brock Purdy and really get to him quickly. And really the big focus for San Francisco has been revamping the offensive line. They brought back Colton McKivitz. They're bringing back John Feliciano. I mean, Aaron Banks and Jake Brendel are okay, but they could certainly look to upgrade this unit heading into the 2024 season. And it just so happens, folks, that the Pittsburgh Steelers have a surplus at interior offensive line right now. Of course, you've got a good collection of talent here for the first time in a while here in Pittsburgh. You got Isaac Seumalo last year, had a fantastic season. James Daniels had another solid season for you at right guard. You draft Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick, and you still have Nate Herbig down there as kind of bench players. And I do think, guys, that Mason McCormick, to this point in OTAs, he looks like somebody that could start right away in the National Football League. I had a day one starter designation on my notes on McCormick as he was heading into the league from South Dakota State, and he has absolutely lived up to that hype at Steelers OTAs to this point, and he could potentially be a starter for the Steelers if they decide to trade James Daniels to the San Francisco 49ers to make sure they can get their bona fide number 2 wide receiver of the future here in Pittsburgh. And it was also reported earlier, I think just last week, that Pittsburgh's not looking to extend James Daniels. So it looks like this is going to be Daniels' last year in Pittsburgh anyway. So if the roadblock for the Steelers to getting a Deebo Samuel or a Brandon Aiyuk is a guy like James Daniels who they can give to the 49ers, I'm absolutely pulling that trigger if I am Steelers GM Omar Khan. And when it comes to the Aiyuk-Deebo Samuel debate here, I do think that if San Francisco is going to deal one of them, it's going to be Deebo Samuel, okay? I think Brandon Aiyuk, right, he's their all-pro. He was more productive than Deebo last year. He's younger. He's had less injuries. I do think Deebo Samuel is the guy that San Francisco is eventually going to unload, whether that be this offseason or next. Now, I do think San Francisco is probably going to want a second-round pick along with James Daniels. And you have to remember, interior offensive linemen by themselves are not super valuable trade pieces. Like, starters go for like fifth-round picks, all right? So that's something you have to keep in mind here. So the Steelers in this potential trade scenario, they'd be getting Deebo Samuel, and they'd be getting Aaron Banks, their current starting left guard there in San Francisco. He could be another rotational piece for Pittsburgh. You can have Banks and McCormick kind of battle it out for that final starting guard spot, and then the 49ers would get a second-round pick next year and James Daniels to kind of upgrade their offensive line as they approach a very important season for their franchise. Now, let me know down there in the comments section, would you accept this trade between the Steelers and 49ers to bring Deebo Samuel to the Steelers, but you have to give up a second-round pick and James Daniels to do so? Type A if you would accept it, or type D if you would decline it. Let me know down there in the comments section for today's pinned comment. YouTube's going to throw you an ad break here in just a couple of seconds. When that happens, take advantage of that time by answering today's pinned question. When it comes to Brandon Aiyuk, I think he's a lot less likely, I'll put it that way, to be traded to the Steelers because he is their all-pro. He is more productive than Deebo Samuel, all these different things. And I think he's the guy they want to lock up to that long-term deal. So therefore, I think the only way the 49ers trade Aiyuk to the Steelers is if he straight up demands a trade away from the 49ers this offseason. And even then, I think it's going to be difficult to get a trade done because he is an all-pro. I think the 49ers are going to want, at the very minimum, a first-round pick for him in 2025. I'm not sure if the Steelers are going to want to give that up, but in this potential trade here, I think the 49ers would trade Brandon Aiyuk. Again, if he demands a trade, if they can get a first-round pick, a 2026 third-round pick, and James Daniels, and then they'll throw in Aaron Banks as kind of a sweetener there for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but they do get Brandon Aiyuk, who is a second-team All-Pro on the other side of George Pickens. Now, the reason why I would decline this particular trade offer from the 49ers is I'm not willing to trade that first-round pick because right now, I mean, let's just face it for what it is. I'm a believer in Russell Wilson, and if Russell Wilson doesn't pan out, I think Justin Fields is going to have an interesting opportunity to prove himself. But at this point in time, the quarterback position for 2025 is not locked in. So if you're not bringing back Russell Wilson, if you're not bringing back Justin Fields, and you're looking for a brand new quarterback option in 2025, it's going to be really nice to have that first-round pick available to you in case you fall in love with a quarterback, in case you can use that first-round draft pick to go out and trade for another quarterback, a veteran, or whatever the case may be. It's nice to have that first-round option just in case you have to go out and get a quarterback. So by no stretch of the imagination am I giving up a first-round pick under any circumstances. So now let's talk about those two potential wide receiver targets that I alluded to at the beginning of today's show. And the first one is Juju Smith-Schuster, a former Steeler, a familiar face here to Steelers fans. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of bringing back Juju because I do think he's starting to get a little bit cooked here. Now, he is still on the younger side. He's a lot younger than I actually thought he was. He's only 27, but he brings some nice size to the table, 6'1", 215 pounds. He's known as a very physical player, especially in the run game. That's, of course, going to appeal to Arthur Smith and what he likes in these wide receivers. And according to multiple reports out of Foxborough, the Patriots are expected to release Juju at some point this offseason. So listen, guys, I'd rather go in another direction than bring back Juju Smith-Schuster, okay? He's had a bunch of injuries to this point. His production has only gone down and down ever since he left the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now he's a Super Bowl champion with the Kansas City Chiefs, so maybe that brings a little bit of veteran savvy and value to your locker room. I guess you can spin this into, this being a decent signing for the Steelers, especially with how barren the wide receiver market is in free agency to this point. But you know what, guys? What scares me about Juju Smith-Schuster specifically is, like I said, the injuries. He had an injury to his shoulder last year. He's had a number of injuries to his knee. And honestly, at this point, guys, his knee gets injured so often. I think he's got chronic issues with that knee, and I just don't trust him to stay on the field for a full season, no matter what his production would be, because at this point in his career, it's just not all that great. He's never been like the best route runner in the world or anything like that. He's been known more as like a big slot, physical run blocker, good hands type of receiver. And, even though that's kind of what the Steelers are looking for in terms of what they want in a wide receiver too heading into the year, I think that there's better options out there. Now, if they decide to bring back Juju, I think, I won't hate it as much as a lot of Steelers fans would hate it out there. I do think that he's a decent fit for the system. I think he is somebody that I think Mike Tomlin likes a lot, that Arthur Smith would really appreciate the way he plays the game. But like I said, guys, there's better options out there, even on the free agency market, and I just don't think I would bring in Juju if I were GM Omar Khan. But what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comments section. Would you bring back Juju for a cheap contract this year? Give me a yes or a no. Give me your answer down there in the comments. Then the other trade target that really intrigues me here, guys, is John Metchie, former receiver for the Alabama Crimson Tide. He was drafted by the Houston Texans back in 2022. He had the battle cancer where he eventually beat it. He came back, played last season as kind of like a rotational wide receiver, and he's only 23 years old. He's still on his rookie contract. Now, he's a little bit smaller at 5'11", 187 pounds, but the thing about John is that even going back to college, he has talked about his love for run blocking, and even at that size, he's one of the more effective run blocking wide receivers out there on the market that could be got for the Steelers right now. So I think Arthur Smith would really appreciate that aspect of him, and he's known for his route running ability. So if you're looking for somebody to replace Deontay Johnson's role in this offense as the true route runner at the Z spot position along this offense, then I think John Metchie could absolutely fill that role. And right now, he is getting buried by that wide receiver room in Houston, okay? They brought in Noah Brown this offseason. They brought in Stephon Diggs this offseason, and that's already including wide receiver room that had Nico Collins, that had Tank Dell, that had Robert Woods. So John Metchie is moving further and further down the totem pole here, and I think it's absolutely possible the Steelers could land him in a trade if they decided to pursue him. And honestly, guys, this offseason, people around Metchie have been raving about him all offseason and his play and what he's going to be heading into his third season in the NFL. This is what C.J. Stroud, the Houston Texans quarterback, had to say about Metchie. Metchie is looking amazing. Everything he will put on the field will be no surprise, but I think everybody in this room knows how special he can be, and he'll put that on the field. Then Delphonte Diamond, he's a wide receiver trainer in the National Football League, had this to say about John Metchie and his skill set. Metchie, that's just another freak of nature. He hasn't even hit his peak yet. Nowhere near close. I've seen the Metchie that no one else has seen. His change of direction is just so ridiculous. But I promise you, this upcoming season, people will C. So that's very high praise from one of the biggest and best wide receiver trainers in our game today. And I do think that Metchie is an intriguing option, specifically as a replacement for Deontay Johnson. You have that big X-receiver in George Pickens. You have that explosive slot wide receiver that can block his ass off in the run game in Roman Wilson. Now you can get a guy in John Metchie who is known as a route runner coming out and is somebody that could replace that role that Deontay Johnson filled in this offense previously, and you can probably get him at a really good price in a trade, whereas you have to trade like a first-round pick and a third-round pick for Brandon Aiyuk, or you'd have to trade a second-round pick for Deebo Samuel, or 2 second-round picks for DK Metcalf, whatever the price tag may be for some of the bigger names. John Metchie might be an up-and-coming player at only 23 years old, and you can probably get him for like a 5th-round pick, a day 3 draft pick, because he is moving down that wide receiver depth chart there in Houston. So listen, this is one that intrigues me. Maybe I would rather go out and get a DK Metcalf or a Cortland Sutton or a Deebo Samuel other than getting John Metchie. But if none of those bigger names are available for the Steelers via trade this offseason, I think that John Metchie, in terms of like that group of players, like the John Metchies of the world, the Traylon Burkses of the world, all these different players that the Steelers could go out and get, I think I actually like Metchie's upside more than some of those other players. And for a 5th-round pick, I think I would probably pull the trigger on this. But let me know down there in the comments section. Would you be happy with John Metchie as the next wide receiver 2 of the Pittsburgh Steelers, type T for trade or type P for pass? Now, I said on Friday, guys, if you gave me a follow on my Twitter at Jack_Sperry, I would be giving shout-outs to everybody that did so. So big shout-out to Chase, Sonny, Matt, so 2 Matts in a row there, Carson, Adrian, Edmund, Robson, Leroy, Jordan, Jim, Joe, AI Short, KP, Pickens is him, A, Justin, and T. And again, make sure you go follow me at Jack_Sperry if you haven't already for more Steelers updates throughout the offseason. And then also make sure you click that subscribe button for our extensive coverage of the Pittsburgh Steelers every single day here on YouTube.